Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. Megan, if that's all right with you, it's 12:32. Um, so thank you everybody for joining here today. My name is Robert Booth. I'm an engagement director here at Accelirate. And on the line as well, we have Justin Keefe, who is one of our data engineers who has really created our process mining training program here at Accelirate. So the goal of this presentation is really to kind of set the stage on what process mining is. Some of you may be familiar with it, and some of you may not. In terms of you want to learn about what the overall capabilities are of these tools, what's the goal, and how you do so. That is the point of this and a couple of presentations that we will be having in the coming weeks. So Justin, if you'd be able to just navigate to the next page for me. Okay, so what is process mining? So at its core, really, process mining is the ability to extract knowledge from event logs. So event logs are anything that's basically produced by a lot of information systems or IT systems used today. So these are your SAPs, your Oracles of the world, and it could go across the spectrum as well to much smaller applications. Most will have some type of event log as an output that you can reference. So these event logs are put in to process mining software, and through their specialized algorithms or proprietary algorithms, they analyze or they create diagrams about a process. So they're providing context of how these particular activities within these applications work with one another. So Justin, is there anything more you want to explain a little bit about how the event logs are structured?
Yeah, so hello again, I'm Justin, and the event logs need to have three unique things. So your event logs, they come from all your different systems across your company. And first thing your event log will need to have to be able to be used by process mining software tools is it will need to have a case ID. And a case ID represents an instance of a process being run. So for example, you can look over and see in the diagram that you see the different case numbers. Those will be unique numbers to each process, and every event log needs to have them. That helps the software to group the different runs of the process together, so then it can analyze that process. And that is a must. Every process must have them, and a typical process used for process mining should have at least 300,000 unique cases, at least, to get proper insights. Because if you don't have a lot of different cases, you won't have a lot of information to use, and you won't really be able to see a lot into your process. The second thing you're going to need, and this is also a must, is a timestamp. A timestamp tells you exactly when that that event log happened. So this, when you have the case ID, now you have all the logs grouped together. With the timestamps, you can see the logical flow of one step of each step of the process, so you know what order the process goes in. And this also helps you to calculate things like throughput time, wait time, maybe like things have stalled. That timestamp is extremely necessary. And then the last thing you need is an activity. What an activity is what that task is being done at that step. So an activity will be an individual task. And that can be anything from like checking a loan number, servicing a loan, paying the loan, receiving an invoice. That's just one step of the overall process. So all three of those things should be present and need to be present. You can also have optional things such as like attributes, other attributes that can tell you more information about the process. Like you could say like, for example, this activity occurred in Germany, or this part of the process occurred in, the United States, maybe in like Texas. So you want to have as many attributes as possible. The more information you have and the better your event logs are structured, the more insights you'll get into with process mining.
So let's also add some context to that in terms of what a process really is as it relates to process mining, because this is something that there's not a lot of concrete answers out there. So we can actually use that to our benefit, because if you think of a process from just an automation perspective, it could be very, very minimal. It could just be something that maybe a process from a business perspective, you only have 5 people. But a process from a process mining perspective really functions more at the area or departmental level. So and that's the reason why you'll see a lot of common use cases being order to cash or procure to pay, is because those are very large processes that almost every modern organization will have. But the use cases are stretched, much farther and wider than just those. Those are the most common ones that you'll see just because every organization should more or less be able to relate to them. But a process itself is something that could be on a much larger scale. So, for example, if you have a loan that you're trying to understand, it goes through default management, you're trying to understand how default management is structured, you'd be able to utilize process mining to be able to get those determinants. Now, the number of processes that may make up that department or that organization may vary depending on the size, but it's something where you can apply the scope to much larger than just one single input and output process that you'd be used to for automation. So if you go to the next slide, Justin, we could kind of give a more of a simpler use case. And if you'd be able to describe that, because we do have a couple more slides. We want to make sure that we get to some questions at the end.
Okay, perfect. So what you have here is the process model. That is one of the most important parts in process mining. So sometimes when you're process mining a process, for example, you won't have a process model to go off of, and that would fall into the process discovery category. So what you could do is you could take those event logs that you have and you could create a process model using the case ID, the timestamp, and the activity. You can create a flow of how the process goes to create a model of it. Like, for example, this is a process model for someone being hungry. So, you get hungry, you go and then you check in your fridge, and then you see in your fridge, there's the decision. Is the fridge empty or is the fridge full? And that will, do you order food or do you prepare food? And then you eat and then your hunger is satisfied. That would be one instance of a process of eating food. And this is how the process model would look for that. And we could use that with event logs. With the event logs, we could create the process model. But if we already have a process model, we could also use those event logs to check if that process model reflects what's happening in reality with the actual data. Because process models are the idealized solution. This is the best case of this is how the process runs. But there can be tons of variants, exceptions that might happen in the process that the process model doesn't catch because that wasn't discussed in the original creation of the process.
So let's talk on that real quickly, and then we can move to the next slide, and because it brings up an important point. So our hunger being satisfied, and again, these are very simplistic examples, but we want to make sure how we could show that this can really apply to anything. Your hunger being satisfied is the end result. Now, how do you even get there, right? And you can apply this to any process. You first have to be hungry, right? That's your problem, and you're solving that hunger by eating. Now, let's say your overall goal was to say, okay, I want to streamline the amount of time it takes from me when I first realize that I'm hungry to me being satisfied. That's the problem you're trying to solve. And why that's important is because many process mining initiatives, you need to make sure you have a problem clearly identified that you want to solve. And the more clear it is, the more streamlined and easier your overall assessment is going to be, because you're going to be able to have a benchmark to compare against. So to put this in another example from a more real world case, let's take that default management. Let's say that we don't know exactly which points we have to map to, which applications. But what I do know this, my problem in default management is that it takes too long for a loan when it first comes into my department for a decision to be made on whether it's going to go into foreclosure, into bankruptcy, or into loss mitigation. So I know that that is my problem. Now, how do I solve that? I have to understand what are the applications involved, get that data that's being pulled out, and then try to provide context to some of these data points. That is all the process model. So just to put it in this perspective as well as a real world perspective, the process model is basically where you have your problem identified, and then now you are structuring how the process functions through the use of the process mining tool and the correlations that are being made. So hopefully that makes sense. And the data systems you see below are just common types of systems or log types that can be utilized. So I just wanted to provide some context as what a process model is, Justin, because not just off this example, but how it could be applied in the real world as well.
Yeah. And so as you see, data systems, their data systems can have data from all across your company. You might not even know that some of your processes are logging data in this way. And that's one of the things you'll discover with process mining is every little step of your process, every system it touches, a process isn't limited to only touching one system and that's it. It could use databases, then it could use transaction logs, message logs. It could go across your whole company, and not all that data you're going to know, or you're going to have someone over you who knows that, this part of the process logs here. You're not going to necessarily have someone who knows all that information. So process mining really gives you understanding of how your process is running and what systems are it's touching, what is being performed.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then
So
we'll get into
yeah, let's go into the overall life cycle, and let's again, because we're going to be going on this more in some of the later presentations, we can kind of leave some of these maybe to questions, because I want to make sure we get through the whole presentation.
Okay. So I'll give you a quick understanding, a quick roundup of the process mining life cycle. So in the first stage of process mining, you'll have your planning and your justifying phase. This is where you'll ask your questions, you'll meet with your stakeholders, you'll create plans and timelines, and that's part of the planning phase. But the justifying phase more is you want to look into the process quality. Is this a process we should process mine? Does it have enough data? Does it have enough, cases? Is it big enough? We also want to check if we have the ability to change the process, because some processes just can't be changed. And if you can't change the process, there's no point in going through and process mining that process. And then then we go to the extracting phase. And in that extracting phase, we get event data, process models, data systems, and we extract them from the management, the subject matter experts, and we realize our objectives in this phase. In this phase, we want to also really analyze and look at the data to see if we have like the right amount of data, if we got the content of the data is there, if the data is relevant, if it's standardized. This phase we'll do a lot of data transformation will happen in the extracting phase. And then we'll go to the third stage. So in the third stage, what we're doing is, now that we have all the extracted data and we have all the data, we're going to either create a process model if we don't have one already, or B, we're going to check if the process model and the event logs, if they're in sync with each other. And if not, we're either going to change the data, change the process, or we're going to change the process model to reflect those logs. And these first three stages are really important in getting your process as stable and structured as possible for the next two stages. So in the next stage, we're creating more integrated process models. We're going to create a lot of dashboards. This is where you're going to get a lot of your insights in your process. And most of your work, most of the valuable insights are going to be here, because you're going to take that process model you made in stage 2 and you're going to add timestamp information to it. And that timestamp information will show you things like your throughput time, your wait time, things like that, just process specific information, so you can see, a process is stalling here. You can see all that information in stage 3, and then you move on to stage 4 after, which is operational support and process reengineering. So in operational support, we try to predict and intervene, and we try to give you all the insights so problems in your process don't come up. And then this is also the stage that the process is changed.
And let's just to kind of summarize that, because we're going to be going over this overall life cycle in a lot more detail in our next presentation, but just to kind of summarize what this means, because there's maybe a lot of words that some of you are not familiar with, and that's okay. We'll provide more context as we go along, but the main point is that stage 0 is really where you're identifying what your problem is, and is it something that you feel that you'd be able to solve with process mining. Stage 1 and 2 is all about extracting the data from the applications to solve your problem. Stage 3 is then reviewing that data and the model that comes out of it, and then determining, is this going in the direction of where it's going to be able to solve my problem? And if so, Justin brought up a good point, is that what change are you going to enact on that problem? Because the main purpose of process mining is to showcase how your organization really functions, showcasing that truth. But once you have that truth and you identify and you have these problems clearly identified and outlined, are you going to enact change on them to solve it? And once you do, what is the difference? This is how where you're always constantly improving is because your organization is always going to change. So you're always going to have room for improvement. This is going to showcase you where you can improve, and showcasing of the change you do enact, what is the difference? So just to kind of tie all that together, I thought was a little bit important. So the next slide is we talked about what's the overall change, but what's really some of the common problems you're going to find with a process mining initiative?
So some of the problems you might find when you're first starting out in process mining is first in your process, you might have unstructured data. So what I mean by unstructured data is, you might have log messages that semantically mean the same thing, but let's say they're spelled differently, things aren't synced up. You're going to want to structure your data and have everything be very uniform. You want to have that case ID, you want to add that timestamp if you can. You want to have your data have as much information and be as structured as possible, because the more structured your data is, the better analysis you'll get on your process, because you'll have the best information to use. Then you might have unknown data. So what I mean by unknown data is, you might have these huge systems like SAP that are running tons of different processes run through them. Is all the data you're using, is that related to the process at hand? The process you're trying to analyze, does all that data relate to it? And do you have all the data? Does someone know that, hey, it's logging information here about the process? Is all that information available? That's something you're going to want to investigate. Then, you might have an unstructured process. So like an unstructured process, you would have, let's say your process model is 20 years old. Let's say there's no process model. There's not a good structure. Is someone overseeing the entire process and has that information? Is it structured? Is everything good to go to process mine? Or do we need to structure your process first and give context, show the steps, show the order it's going in. And then it could even be unknown. You could have unknown processes. Like, do we know everything about the process? Do we know all the systems it's touching? Do we have all the event logs? Are there even event logs? Are there gaps in the process when it's going from system to system? And do we need to figure what those gaps are between, your process going from one system to a next, one factory to another factory? Do we have gaps in the process? So those are some of the big common problems that we see in process mining when companies first start out.
Yeah, and let's kind of summarize that as well, right? So what we mean by unstructured data or unknown data. So the larger your application is, so if you have an SAP or an Oracle, you're going to have an event log quality that's going to be a lot higher than if you have a proprietary application, across your organization. Normally, the log quality is going to be much higher on those large enterprise applications. So as you move down, you have to be able to understand what are the logs that are coming out of these applications and how you structure them as the event log quality decreases or diminishes. So these are some common problems that you're going to be finding in a lot of implementations when you first begin, because that's where you're really setting the stage or laying the land of how your applications, of how they are set up across your organization. So let's go ahead to that next slide. Some of the best practices as it relates to process mining. Now, keep in mind, these are very, very high level, but these are some of the things that you would want to keep in mind whenever doing an implementation.
When you're looking over best practices, like Robert said, these are very high level points, but you're going to want to transform your data. A lot of the time, you're going to want to organize and standardize your data across different systems so everything matches up, everything's formatted the same way. This can be done within some of the process mining softwares, or you can externally do it, but you want to transform your data so it'll be able to work with the software that you're choosing to use. And then you'll want to transform your model. If a process model is outdated, you're going to want to update it with the most current information. And you might want to even factor in exceptions, different variants of the process, because those exceptions might become reality, 10 years later. So you're going to want to transform your model, and then you're going to want to create dashboards. Like the process graph you see on the right, you're going to want the best way you're going to get insights is with dashboards. So you can make column graphs, bar charts, anything you want, and those will help to give you insight into your process. Dashboards are really the main way that process mining gives insight into your process, and those are some of the best practices you're going to want to do when process mining.
Yeah, and let's kind of we can go ahead and move forward to the next slide, but I can talk a little bit about this because we're going to get to the benefits part of this. It's one of the reasons why we're showcasing a lot of this information is because we want to make sure that everybody understands what the real capability is of these tools, because sometimes it's often understated. but as well the level of effort needed for you to do an effective implementation can be pretty high in comparison to, say, an RPA initiative. So it's very important for you to have a very sound methodology when it comes to implementation. Utilizing a partner is one of the most common ways. So that's something that our methodology, we understand the complexities involved in being able to provide a successful implementation. But what we've done is made clear benchmarks in terms of what is a goal, is that goal being met? So you have a very clear understanding of what you're going to be getting in the allotted time, which is something that is from a lot of stakeholders that I have personally spoke with or interacted with as it relates to process mining. One of the common things that they find is that, well, I don't really know, what is going to be included. I don't have, I'm an SOW or anything like that. What is it exactly that I'm going to be provided? And the problem with that, or the reasoning for that, is because there is not a clear problem identified. And that's why it's so important in that initial stage that you have a problem that you believe you'll be able to solve, or be able to address, rather, I should say, because that's really how we're going to be able to implement this methodology in the timeframes that we are doing, as well as enable the organization to be able to take ownership of that and move forward with across the organization with other processes and areas. So as it relates to, just to kind of showcase what's the purpose of setting the stage, all that is to getting to this benefits, is that really what you're going to be able to see is you're going to be able to understand and validate. So we're putting processes there because that's how it relates to the tool. Processes, licenses is what will be solved. But realistically, it's not a single process. It's really your organization and your department, how it functions. And because that will always change, this will always be useful because you are able to update it accordingly. And it's giving you real-time information and objective information. So at the beginning, yes, it is data that you have to contextualize, but once that is done and you have that foundation built, and again, through the methodologies we've created, we're able to do so. Once that foundation has been created, then you're just building on top of that to add more context to your overall area. So you don't have to keep redoing efforts. You're able to then leverage off previously created ones to help streamline further insights. So one of the main benefits, I would say, in terms of the understanding and the validation is really getting an objective view of how your organization functions and be able to adjust that accordingly as your organization changes. So I think there's one last slide, but I want to make sure we get to our questions. And again, this is kind of going on top of this. Once we have those problems identified and validated, we can then enact change upon those and then also monitor the change or the benefit in those changes over time. So you're actually able to get objective information of what is the difference being made, which is a huge benefit to the business as well as any COE or provider that would be implementing this. So it's 12:55. I appreciate everybody sticking through this with us. Justin, if there's any more points you want to add, feel free to do so. But if not, then I think we could open up the floor for some questions.
I think it'd be a good time to start with the questions now.
Okay. So if anybody wants to put in the chat, you can send to Megan. We'll be able to just kind of read off some questions there till the end of the call.
Yeah, so the first one submitted is, how is process mining different from process discovery?
So process mining and process discovery are two really independent things in my opinion. Now there is some overlap, don't get me wrong, but they really have different use cases. So process discovery, as it relates to automation, I should really say, is really understanding, okay, I am in this department, but my end goal is really to understand what I can apply my automation, or where I can leverage my automation. So in order to do that, you need to understand, well, what are the processes that make up that given area or department? So process discovery is really just looking at what are the processes or the work that makes up that given area. Process mining is contextualizing that work to identify or bring out problems or identify problems that you can then solve with automation, with streamlining, with application changes, so on and so forth. So process mining really kind of goes a little bit before at a more macro level, or rather I should say before, but above process discovery. Process mining is on a much more macro level and an organizational level where you're able to enact change. The change that you can act could be automation, but you need to first identify what are the processes for you to enact that change with automation. That's where process discovery comes in. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think process discovery is more of an umbrella term. I would consider that to be just an umbrella term to discover processes within the organization. Process mining, very specifically, is an automated process by which you try to figure out, visualize a process. I think there's in fact a BPMN definition for the word process mining. So business process mining is a term to visualize given processes, given logs or data that you may already have. However, process discovery is more of a broader term used for discovering processes within an organization.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess the process discovery I was relating was solely to automation, but yes, that's a much better point.
Okay, there's a few more. The next one is, how long would it take to start seeing insights into a process?
So this one, it can really vary, right? But the point is that we're standardized that because it really is dependent on, do we have the problem identified? If you have the problem identified, then in terms of timelines, it really is all comes down to how large the problem really that you're trying to solve. So let's go with that default management example. If I have a resource, a process mining resource that is very familiar with that particular industry and that particular area or process, is going to be significantly quicker than somebody who has none at all. So the standard time frame from initial onboarding to a first milestone, if you will, depending on the size, is anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks.
Yes, and I would say a lot of that factors into also how complex your process can be. So if you have a process that touches several different systems, that process will obviously take a lot longer to mine and get actual insights into, because trying to standardize that data will take a lot longer because there's more systems involved. So really a lot of it comes down to how complex your process is, but you should be able to start seeing insights in the first around month of process mining on a more simple process.
Okay, there's a few more. Next one is, what roles would you need to perform process mining?
Okay, so generally you would have a process developer, and what they would do is they would create the dashboards. They would get all the data, they would transform the data, and they present it in a way to a process analyst. Now, a process analyst is more of like a business analyst role, and they'll analyze the business, organize the insights that the dashboards created by the process developer made. They'll organize that data and present those insights then to the business. And then you'll need people on the business side to help get you access to the systems, to explain the process. You'll need full cooperation from the IT department of whatever company you're process mining for. You'll need their full cooperation because you'll need to get access, you'll need understanding, you'll need to be able to get all this information. So it's really a team effort of several people from the process miners and from the business working together, but really you need a process developers and process analysts are the two most important roles when process mining.
Okay, next, can you clarify which is the macro level and micro level between process mining and process discovery?
Yeah, sure. So process discovery, Ahmed, as mentioned before, I was seeing it more of a term from accelerated discovery perspective, but really process discovery is really the umbrella term in which all of this really falls under. So the discovery I was mentioning was for automation, accelerated discovery being that. So the macro and micro level, the macro level of process mining rather, is, and again, I hope I'm answering your question correctly, is really looking at what are the main activities, i.e. Processes that make up your organization. That's the macro level. The micro level is finding the correlations between those activities or processes to identify any types of inefficiencies or bottlenecks that can then be, you can enact change on for benefit. Process discovery is an umbrella term that kind of follows all of that. So on the macro level, process mining is part of process discovery. On the micro level is really, for me, as it relates to automation, is process discovery is, okay, now I have these problems identified and clear. What change I want to enact on that? Okay, it's automation. What are the tasks that make up those processes? that I can then automate. That would be the micro level of process discovery as it relates to automation. But there are other ways that you're able to enact change, like I said, through streamlining, through application changes, and so on. I do actually have a hard stop at 1. So, Justin, if you want to take over any more questions, or Amit, I really appreciate everybody joining for today. And like I said, we'll be having a follow-up presentation to go a little bit more in depth, and I believe in the next 2 weeks.
That was actually the last question, so I think you're all set. Thank you, RJ. Thanks, Justin.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.